What does it mean that Donald Trump is siding with Putin's Russia at the UN against Europe? And how should Europe react? How should the new German government react to this new United States? I have the chance to talk about all these issues with the former Trump security advisor and former UN ambassador, John Bolton. John Bolton, thank you so much for being back on our program.
Glad to be with you.
I would like to ask you about the UN, of course. The United States was siding with Russia against Europe. When you learned that, how did you feel about that?
Well, it's shameful, really. It threatens the NATO alliance. It puts the United States on the wrong side of aggression in this war. I think it shows just how difficult it will be for Ukraine to get a decent settlement of this conflict if we're going to have negotiation. I'm very worried about it. I'm also worried about the difficulty that the West as a whole will have once Trump's gone. And although it seems like a long time, he's only got 47 months left to how to put the West back together again. And I think the U.S. will have a lot of work to do to convince people that our word is good and that we are actually a nation of normal people again. So I hope in the meantime, Europeans don't get obsessed with just being European. The threats that we face around the world are threats to the West as a whole, coming primarily in the rest of the century from China and the China-Russia axis, which is developing. So this is not going to be an easy period for Europeans. It's not going to be an easy period for a very substantial number of people in America. I don't think Trump's vote in the United Nations represents more than a fraction of the voters in this country. I don't think people realize that by electing Donald Trump, we'd be voting with Russia in the UN. And I think these things have effects. I wish the negative effects on Trump's popularity were moving more quickly, but I think they are happening.
Many people are worried that there is like a new friendship between China, Russia, and the United States, and they will kind of start kind of a deal saying, okay, we leave each other alone and everybody can do what everybody wants to do against the rest of the world. What do you make of that?
Well, that's a concept that I know people have talked about. That's beyond Trump's capability. I think what he wants with China is to make the biggest trade deal in history. He said that before in his first term. We'll see what happens on that, but it's obviously a dramatic change in American policy. I think it's a disastrous mistake, but nobody's yet found a way to explain to Trump why going back to being a normal American president benefits him. It doesn't matter whether it benefits Europe. It doesn't really even matter if it benefits the United States. What benefits Donald Trump? People need to understand in Europe, you're not dealing with somebody who has a philosophy, who has a strategy, who does policy the way we all normally understand that. He's concerned with one thing, and that is, how does this make Donald Trump look?
Do you think he understands how dangerous Vladimir Putin is?
No, I don't. He thinks he's friends with Putin. And Trump has said many times he believes if he has good relations with the head of a foreign country, then relations between the U.S. and that country are good. Now, I would never say personal relations are irrelevant, even in international affairs, but they don't dictate the sum total of the relationship, especially when you're dealing with somebody as cold-blooded as Vladimir Putin.
There's a major shift, of course, in the Ukraine policy of the United States. What does this mean for Ukraine and for Europe at this very moment?
Well, it's the shift to supporting Russia's view that talking about Ukrainian membership in NATO was the cause of the war is just so totally divorced from reality that it's hard to know how to pull Trump back down to ground. I don't think the minerals deal that they're going to sign tomorrow will be that significant. I think it looks more like an agreement to agree, with a lot more to be negotiated. I have no doubt Zelensky's main pitch is not going to be on the mineral deal. It will be on the security that he seeks, whatever the terms of this settlement are going to be. And it just underlines for historical purposes how tragic it was that in 2008, when George W. Bush proposed bringing Ukraine and Georgia into NATO on a very fast track, Germany, France, and others rejected that. Had we, just as we've now welcomed Finland and Sweden into NATO because they realized the only real security in Europe, at least then, was to be behind a NATO border, I think the same would have been true for Ukraine.
We are just about getting a new government in Germany. We just had election. What do you expect or what do you hope Germany to do when it comes to Ukraine?
Well, I know one of Friedrich Mertz's first statements was after learning of the election results that over a period of time he wants German independence, European independence from the United States. With all due respect, that's a mistake. Uh, I understand that what Trump is doing is very harmful. There's no argument about that. But the real question here is whether we care about the West as a whole, or in Germany's case, you care more about the EU. The EU alone, cut off from the United States, is much more vulnerable to China and Russia than it is joined with the United States.
But doesn't Donald Trump force Friedrich Mertz and other European leaders to exactly kind of that path?
Well, I think it should be a further incentive to spend more on defense. But let me just point one other thing out to you. I say this respectfully. For decades, Americans like me firmly, I hope firmly and clearly said to Germany and others, spend more on defense. I hope we said it politely. We got zero response. Along comes Donald Trump and slaps Europe in the face. And Europe wakes up and says, well, maybe we should spend more on defense. Do you see that's teaching the wrong lesson?
Still, wonder what Germany and Europe should do now as Donald Trump is putting so much pressure. I mean, do you think Europe should still rely on this United States?
Well, I think there are plenty of people in the United States, many, many in Congress, an overwhelming majority in both parties, and people inside Trump's administration who won't be saying it publicly, but who know that NATO has been a very successful alliance and that it'd be foolhardy to give it up. Unfortunately, they don't include Trump in their number, but to simply say at this point, because of what Trump is doing on Ukraine, we're gonna conclude the worst will happen, and there's no way to fix it. Once you go down that road, it's very hard to come back. So I'm not offering a completely clear path here because we're in uncharted territory. But I do think the wrong path is to say you can't ever count on the United States again. That's not where the overwhelming majority of our citizens are.
Where's the opposition?
I think it's starting. I think you can see signs of it. I wish there were more. I do live in reality, but I think it's starting in a variety of fronts. And I think the vote in the UN with Russia and North Korea, even China abstained on that vote, uh, and many many other things that are happening mean that even within the Republican Party, although much of it in Congress is intimidated, more and more people are speaking out. A lot more needs to happen, but there are early signs finally that it is happening.
You know Donald Trump quite well. What do you think how long this relationship between him and Elon Musk will last?
With respect to both of them, as long as it's mutually beneficial. Musk is often referred to as a heat shield for Trump. He's doing a lot of things that appeal to Trump's base, but if it gets inconvenient, Musk can be sacrificed. Musk, at the same token, has enormous economic interest. He manufactures most of his Tesla vehicles in China. As we all face the risk of a trade war, he's very much at risk. He has enormous contracts with the federal government, with NASA and the space program. So I think that they each have their objectives. So far, they coincide. They're not going to coincide forever. And that will be the point when it breaks up. And it could come sooner rather than later.
I'm, of course, also asking you as a journalist about the freedom of press in this country. How do you see these latest developments?
Well, I think this is the things that he's done in cutting AP off because they won't refer to the Gulf of America, which is one of the silliest things he's done since the inauguration, are very harmful. I don't know that you can prevail in litigation that say they're a violation of the First Amendment, but I think that this is one of several steps that is beginning to cause people to understand that Trump is a problem across the board. It's not each individual thing he does that's a problem. It's that Trump himself is the problem. So he's going to cause considerable damage. There's no doubt about it. So the effort has to be to mitigate the damage and then correct it as quickly as we can when he's gone.
We talked briefly about China. How worried should Taiwan be?
Well, I think it's a very bad signal that he sent to Beijing. I think Beijing has been helping Russia from the beginning of their war against Ukraine. I think there was a lot of talk about how they were concerned about Russia and wanted to be a mediator. Completely wrong. They have benefited. They've aided Russia. This is part of the China-Russia axis that's forming. And if I were in Taiwan, I would be very worried. I told the story in my book that several times when I was in the White House, Trump would take one of his famous Sharpie pens and point to the tip and say, "See that? That's Taiwan." And then he'd point to the Resolute desk in the Oval Office, which is a huge desk, and say, "See that? That's China." That tells you, in his mind, the relative importance of Taiwan and China. He doesn't understand the complexities. He doesn't even understand the economics. He said during the last campaign that Taiwan stole the American semiconductor chip manufacturing industry and took it to Taiwan. They did not steal it. They built it from scratch, and we weren't paying attention. That doesn't mean that we're not concerned that that capability not fall into China's hands, but the idea that somehow it's Taiwan's fault and not ours is just shows he's detached from reality.
Do you see any timeline here when China might take action against Taiwan?
It's been customary in recent administrations. China's tested a new American president. They certainly did in the George W. Bush administration, forcing down one of our planes that was in international waters, but listening in to what was going on in China. I don't know that China needs to test Trump. I think they're watching very carefully, though, and undoubtedly thinking through in a very systematic way how to take advantage of him. Trump doesn't do that. He'll wake up one morning and decide maybe he'll put 50% tariffs on China, not 10%. But the Chinese will be ready, and that will be a very, very important in the next year or so what that is.
What does it mean that Donald Trump replaced all the senior legal officers in the Army, Navy, and Air Force with basically total loyalists?
I think this has, at this point, mostly to do with the idea of wokeness and trying to get that approach out of the military. That's certainly what they've been talking about. I think it's the problem is not as much with removing the lawyers as with removing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and some of the others. Because it presumes that they won't follow the Trump administration policies. Now, it's not a question whether you agree or disagree with them, but civilian control of the military, which we've worked hard to establish in the United States, has a corollary, which is that the politicians don't politicize the military. And that means that the military doesn't dispute orders, whether it disagrees with them or not. And if a new administration changes them 180 degrees, they should comply with those orders with the same fidelity they complied with the earlier set. If they don't, then it's legitimate to fire them. But what's happened here is that they haven't gone through the test, which I think our military would pass, of complying with Trump administration policies, and that's a very dangerous precedent to set.
So I'm of course asking as a German, and kind of it always starts with the military, it always starts with the generals. How concerned do we have to be?
Well, I don't think there's a reason to be concerned. I don't think Trump has a broader philosophy. In fact, I don't think he has any philosophy at all, other than the greater glorification of Donald Trump. So this assault on wokeness, which is being carried out across the government, is an important aspect of Trump's political base. They believe all these things very strongly. So he is, in a sense, fulfilling a campaign promise that doesn't necessarily imply any other significant change inside the military. I think people are legitimately worried about it, but I don't think Trump has the imagination to go beyond that, at least not yet.
John Bolton, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.